freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dreams some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation once again for this precious freedom that we have here in the United States of America, the freedom to be all that we can be, the freedom from oppressive government, and the freedom to prosper and to seek the fulfillment of our dreams, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a great and wonderful place, but its freedoms are threatened. As I have mentioned week after week on this program, Character Matters, and I welcome you to another edition. My name is Dr. George Simon. I am the author of Character Disturbance, the Phenomenon of Our Age, the international bestseller In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, and the Judas Syndrome. And it's my mission to do what I can to help safeguard the freedoms that we enjoy against the enemy from within, which I believe is more than anything else the character crisis that we face. And we are going to have a good discussion about one prime example of that today. You know, you can't pick up a newspaper or watch the tube or search the internet without hearing about some egregious example that proves the point about how ridiculous and how serious this character problem has become in our country. Yes, there are still responsible folks of integrity out there. They're carrying the burden for a lot of others. They're working hard to pay the bills, to raise their families, and the burden on them grows exponentially every single day. It's a pattern, a trend that can't really keep going, and it's something that we need to be very wary of, because the burden on folks who are irresponsible and who lack the character necessary to keep our freedoms safe, the burden on them grows less and less every day, and this is a trend that cannot continue without dire consequence. So one of my missions is to call attention to the enemy within this character problem that we face, because it threatens our dear freedoms so much, and also the enemy without. There really are those who hate freedom, hate our way of life, hate our ideals, many of which we don't even live up to ourselves. I'm aware of that. But nonetheless, there are those folks who hate these principles just for what they are. And we've been in big time denial about this. And I'm going to put that issue kind of on the back burner for the later part of the hour, because another example occurred in the news about that this past week that just goes to exemplify the kind of problem that we face, and I'm going to be talking about that just a little bit. But I want to get to the example of this week. It was an ongoing example that really began some time ago. It really points to the character issue, and there's so much that can be learned from it. I don't want to beat a dead horse, and I don't want to rehash information that most folks have already become familiar with, nor do I want to try and preach to folks or instruct folks in things that they have probably already figured out for themselves. But I really think that this example, and I'm speaking of the case of Donald Sterling, the owner of the LA Clippers, who's been in some heat for some comments that he made that almost anyone reasonably could interpret as racist comments, comments that he denies are racist. But we'll get into that in a moment. And the kinds of discord, the attitudes he so brazenly showed in a tape that was released, a tape that he says he didn't know was being made. And there are some really good lessons to learn, not only about the nature of character disturbance itself, but also how these folks operate, how character impaired people operate, what makes them tick, how they try to pull the wool over your eyes, how they try to manipulate and control, how they do their best to what we call impression manage, sometimes not doing a very good job. And why they have us scratching our heads and asking questions about things like, do they really believe what they're saying? And do they hear themselves? Do they see what they're doing? All those kinds of issues, very important questions to address. And I think that the comments made, especially during an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper, the comments made by Donald Sterling give us some real insight into those. So I want to talk about that for the first part of the program. And I also want to invite your comments. Join the discussion, if you will, at 718-717-8296. We'd love to have you. That's 718-717-8296. I'll be glad to take your call. And we want to keep the discussion straightforward and civil, but we really do have a lot to talk about. I also want to invite you to visit my latest postings on the internet, both on my own personal blog at www.manipulative-people.com. That's www.manipulative-people.com. That's where I blog, and you'll find my latest post from last Friday on there. And also, I write for another popular blog at www.counselingresource.com. That's www.counseling, with two L's, by the way, resource.com. And also visit my website at www.drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. Well, let's get into the discussion of this interview, because I think it really speaks to so many issues that I talk about in both my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance, and also to a lesser extent in the Judas Syndrome. People with impaired characters, once you know the signs of character disturbance, once you know the kinds of doublespeak folks engage in when they're doing their impression management routines, once you see the tactics that they use, tactics that we used to think back in the days of traditional psychology, psychology that has pretty much unlived its usefulness in the era of character disturbance. Many of the things that we'll be talking about today used to be seen as defense mechanisms, and they were thought to be unconscious ways that people defended their self-esteem and their egos against anxiety, against feeling unnerved or feeling attacked in some way or feeling afraid in some way. And unconsciously, without even thinking about it, automatically these mental processes went into play that protected them from horrible emotional pain. That was the thinking about some of the tactics that we'll talk about tonight. But when I started doing my clinical research and when I started gathering data in case study after case study, I realized that many of the things that we have called defense mechanisms really are not defensive in character at all. Rather, they are offensive power tactics. Let me be clear. They are offensive power tactics. They are deliberate, not unconscious, conscious and deliberate ways to attack not just other people, to get them to back off, back down, and step into line and get into control, but also tactics to fight against internalizing the values and the standards that we would like people who evidence character disturbance to adopt. If they would stop fighting for a minute, stop fighting to manipulate us, stop fighting to assert their point of view, and actually open themselves up to the possibility of change, then things would be different. But that's not how character disturbed people operate. They resist the socialization process. I'll repeat that. They resist actively the socialization process. There isn't one of these folks who doesn't know what it is we would like them to do to behave more responsibly. I'll repeat that. There isn't one character-disturbed person on the planet that hasn't heard a million times, a gazillion times, and doesn't know by heart the kinds of things that we want them to do, the kinds of things that we'd like them to take to heart in order to be a better person. They see, as I say in my workshops, they see, but they disagree. Kind of rhymes, doesn't it? They see, they disagree. What I mean by that is they know what it is we want them to do, but they don't want to do it. They have a way of doing things, a way of looking at things, a way of getting on in the world that they think works for them and that they prefer. And so when we call things to their attention, and they engage in these tactics that we used to call defense mechanisms, what they're saying to us is, I hear you, I don't agree with you, and even though I have no intention of doing the things that you're asking me to do, I still want you to think fairly well of me. So I'm going to do my best to craft as favorable an image for you as I can through the use of these tactics, and maybe I will sway you. Maybe I will convince you that I'm not such a bad guy, and you'll get off my case, you'll see it my way, and then you'll not see me for who I really am. And I don't have to change. That's what they're really saying. Now, getting that is the absolute key to empowering yourself in your relationships with any disturbed characters. I get hundreds of emails a month from folks who say that very thing. This is what makes all the difference. As soon as folks start disregarding all of the things they've read in popular psychology books, all the things they've heard from their therapists over the years, as soon as they start taking a new perspective on the person or persons in their lives that are just driving them crazy, and see them for the kinds of people that they really are, and for the kinds of things they really do, as soon as they see it, everything changes. Everything changes, and their lives get better. And you may be one of those folks that have had that experience, and if you have and you want to share it, I really urge you to join the conversation at 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. Let's get to this Sterling situation, because it is such a poignant example of a really disturbed character, person with severely impaired integrity in their character, trying to play the game of impression management, actually not doing a very good job of it. I mean, this person's 80 years old. He may even be getting mildly demented, maybe. Who knows? But let's put it this way. He wasn't on his A game when he was doing his interview with Anderson Cooper. But still, we can learn a lot, because the kinds of behaviors that he showed are the kinds of behaviors that every single disturbed character shows at some point or another. Well, Anderson Cooper I've got the transcript of the interview in front of me, and I'm going to read just a few parts that I thought were really interesting. I made a terrible, terrible mistake, Donald Sterling says. I made a terrible, terrible mistake, and I'm here with you today to apologize and ask for forgiveness. Now, let's make something clear. A mistake is like when you accidentally step on someone's foot because you haven't been looking. Or a mistake is when you're rushing through a handwritten letter and you misspell a word. That's a mistake. I have heard character after character, impaired character after impaired character, use this term. I've talked to prisoners who have committed the most heinous crimes, refer to the most brutal acts you could imagine as mistakes, and then follow that up with, doesn't everyone make mistakes? This is a way to trivialize, or as I point out in both of my books, minimize the reality. And the disturbed character knows it. There's a difference between a mistake that incidentally occurs and accidentally possibly hurts someone, and a typical act of character-impaired judgment that does great harm but gets caught, and now the perpetrator has egg on their face and some explaining to do. That is not a mistake. Make no mistake. Make no mistake, that is not a mistake. So right from the get-go, as soon as he opens his mouth, this man starts the game of impression management. And I tell folks who come to my workshops, I tell this to therapists too, because when they're working with these folks, this is something that they have to get the hang of. You can't listen to these folks. If you listen to what they say, you might get swayed. You must listen for, not to, but for the kinds of things that they say. If you listen for the little clues that tip you off about what they're really like, then you have their number. And then shame on you if you allow yourself to be victimized. Because once you have a disturbed character's number, once you know you're dealing with somebody of really questionable character, it's on you to protect yourself and to keep your distance and to know the tactics and to respond appropriately and remain empowered yourself. But sometimes these folks fool us, and the way they fool us is that we don't listen carefully for the things that give them away. So right off the bat, this guy gives us a real tip into his character. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. Now, why does he say terrible, terrible, and then mistake? Well, the terrible, terrible is to convince you he realizes how serious it is. Because the word terrible has a serious connotation, doesn't it? But the terrible, terrible precedes the word mistake that has a much different meaning. And he knows it has a different meaning. He wants you to buy it as a mistake, not as a horrible indication of who he is, and he's been caught, and he really needs to apologize for who he is, and not only make amends, but do something about who he is. But rather he wants you to forgive him instantly because it was simply, albeit a terrible, an innocent mistake. As innocent as accidentally stepping on someone's foot, or as inadvertently misspelling a word when typing a letter. That's what he wants you to believe. He's on the game of impression management right from the get-go, and he doesn't do a very good job. One of the reasons is, folks are becoming more attuned to this. When I first wrote In Sheep's Clothing, in 1996, the first edition of In Sheep's Clothing came out. The stuff I had to say in there was absolutely radical at the time. And there weren't a whole lot of folks who agreed with me. There weren't a lot of folks who agreed at all about how these folks operate, about the tactics that they used, about what they were really like in character. I included a vignette in Sheep's Clothing of a person who, if you read the story, the vignette in the chapter on this person depicts a boss who is a real schmoozer, knows how to basically seduce the friendship and loyalty of his coworkers, but he was really a ruthless customer. And the editor at the publishing house that was thinking of publishing the book at the time said, "No one will believe, based on your depiction, that a person like this could be really so evil in nature." Well, this person showed himself, the person that the story is based on, showed himself months later committing a heinous crime, actually, and going to prison for life for it. So, I want to tell you that there were not very many people at the time who recognized these signs of character disturbance as serious as they are, but more and more folks have gotten clued in over the years. And thanks to the research of a lot of other folks and a lot of other fairly decent books out there, we've now come to appreciate how many nefarious characters there are out there. We've given them all kinds of labels. And some folks have become kind of astute, especially in recognizing double talk and double speak and impression management. And I think Mr. Anderson Cooper, in this interview on CNN, did a fairly decent job, actually, although I would have pressed much further because there were many times he had Mr. Sterling on the ropes and could have done a better job of exposing him and getting him to trip himself up, but he didn't. And I think that speaks to the character of the interviewer. You know, most of us decent folks won't go for the jugular when we see it exposed. That's just who we are. We don't have that same instinct as some of the more character-disturbed folks have. So we see that vulnerability, and we'll only go so far. We don't want to completely destroy the person's attempt at impression management and completely destroy their image. We think we might permanently damage their self-esteem. We might even think we provoke their ire, so we don't do it. And I think that a couple of opportunities were missed by Mr. Cooper, but I think that speaks well for his character as well. Right after Mr. Sterling talks about making this terrible, terrible mistake, immediately thereafter he says, and I quote, "And I have hurt myself and so many innocent people. I spoke to a girl that I was fond of, and I don't know why I can never, when I listen to that tape, I don't even know how I could say words like that. I'm not a racist. I love people. I always have. But those words came out of my mouth, I guessed. And I'm so sorry, and I'm so apologetic. Those words came out of my mouth." This is classic disturbed character speak. The words, they live all by themselves. They just came out. They have a life of their own. The words, they have power to take action on their own. He didn't speak them. He didn't mean them. They just came out. And you know what? He doesn't even know how they came out. They just came out. Not once, not twice, 3 times in different sentences. Then again. Each time a little worse than the last time. But yet, according to him, they just came out, and he doesn't know how. So he's sorry. You know why? Because they hurt innocent people, and you know what? They even hurt him. They hurt him. It hurt his ex-wife, he says. And his little grandchild. Listen to this. My little grandchild goes to a Catholic nursery. Interesting, he threw that in. And they were passing around candy to everybody. The very vague they. Classic character. Who's the they? Teachers? Authorities at the school, maybe? Who? They were passing around candy to everybody. When they got to her, his innocent little grandchild, in a nursery, when they got to her, they said, "We don't give candy to racists." Now, what he wants us to believe is that because of the brouhaha over his comments, that his little, sweet, innocent grandchild was at a Catholic school, no less. And she was denied a piece of candy when everybody else got one, because they don't give candy to racists. And she must be a racist, right? Because her grandfather made a racist remark. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Willing to play for sympathy. And that playing the victim is such a classic disturbed character manipulator card. It's classic. You can hear the violins in the background. What character disturbed people know more than anything else about we good old-fashioned neurotics is that we have this thing called conscience. And because we have this thing called conscience, and usually a well-developed conscience at that, which is what makes us neurotic, because of this, we hate to see anyone in pain. We hate to think that we did anything or said anything that causes anybody any pain. And we hate to think that in any way somebody else has been hurt or victimized. We take pity on them. We have empathy. We have compassion. We have the capacity for that. We have the capacity for that, whereas disturbed characters have an impaired capacity for that. And in the case of the most extremely disturbed character, the psychopath, no capacity for it. No empathy. Now, I want to ask you to think for a minute. Just think about what this person said. He is trying to make you think two things and trying to make you do something else when he runs this game. He wants you to believe that he has been victimized in some way and that innocent members of his family have been victimized, unfortunately, so that you will have pity on them and realize the pain that he has, and so that you will be more inclined to feel sorry for him, as opposed to having some righteous anger toward him, and, here's the most important thing, and be willing to hold him to account. That's the most important thing. Now, I think the explanation that he gave for why he made the comments that he did about black individuals, about Miss Stiviano, are really remarkable. First of all, he's not telling the whole truth about that. He was so evasive during that part of the interview. I don't know how many of you saw it. It's worth checking out on YouTube. It's worth seeing any of the replays on any of the media that have it, Hulu or whatever. But it's just such a great character study. This is a crash course in character disturbance. Everything you've read about in either In Sheep's Clothing or my book Character Disturbance or the Judas Syndrome is in this interview at some point or another. And you can see it quite clearly. And you can also see how, despite the fact that the interviewer does a pretty good job holding this person to account, he is still, to some degree, managed by the tactics of Mr. Sterling. It's really remarkable. It's a really remarkable exercise in impression management. But I want to get to that part where he talks about Stiviano. And he talks about why he made the exact comments that he did. Here's what he says. Now, I didn't know that she was recording, and she was talking so strange, all of a sudden about politics. Okay, here's the setup. He wants us to think that he was being set up, and perhaps he was, in a sense. But he also mentions that because he is setting us up. Okay, that's why he mentions it. And here's the setup. I want to explain a couple of things that I said. One of the things I said was, don't bring blacks to my game. Well, there's 25% of my whole game are black people. Now, I'm reading verbatim, so I realize he didn't speak all that eloquently. And I love them. She would always use the word black. That's a black girl. That's a black guy. This is black. That is black. What's he implying there? She would always use the word. In other words, he wouldn't use the word at all if she hadn't brought it up. And besides, she's always making distinctions when perhaps he never makes distinctions. He's color blind. You see, many times it's what they don't say. It's just the impression they want to convey. And if you're listening to the double talk, the mumbo jumbo, if you're listening to the careful web they weave, you're likely to get taken in. You could get taken in. She's always using this term. So when she says to me, I'm going to bring 4 gorgeous black guys to the game, the players she was referring to, either football or basketball, I was a little jealous maybe. Oh. Okay. He's jealous because she's going to bring beautiful black people as opposed to beautiful any other kind of people to his game. Just before I'd said to her, don't bring them to my game because of my jealousy. Just before he said that, he said, don't bring players to the game. I mean, in any event, she never brought anybody to the game. It was like she was baiting me just to say things. And then Cooper, to his credit, says, so you're saying that she, before the recording that we heard, she said she was going to bring 4 black players. She specifically said black players, and Sterling said yes. And Cooper then says, and are you saying that that's what this conversation sparked from, it stemmed from? And Sterling says yes. So he's implying that there's conversation before this that we don't have that we're not privy to hear, and that it explains more of the reason why he brings the black issue up. Well, it doesn't explain anything. It especially doesn't explain any of the things that he had later. I mean, Even if you buy this, if you then listen further in his own words to the rest of what he said, you couldn't possibly draw the conclusion that he was only responding to earlier remarks that got him jealous. It would be totally unreasonable. But that's what he wants you to think. So, he feigns some innocence there. He implies that there's more to the story that we don't hear, and therefore we are judging him unfairly. That points the finger at us, and that makes us less likely to hold him to account. That's how manipulation works. That's how these characters work. And in the process, in the doing of these things, everything you need to know about the character of this individual is there. Is there. I want to read one other thing, because I think it really speaks to what this person, if he is hurting, what he is hurting about. He talks about being in kind of love with this girl and being jealous and being deluded. Maybe he deludes himself that a person like her can like him at his age. And, you know, we all know that this person got to be as wealthy and successful as he did, being kind of clueless. We know this, don't we? It's reasonable to assume, isn't it, that this is a person who amassed a small fortune, being a slumlord, fleecing people, building an empire. It's rational to assume that he got there being pretty clueless. Not just clueless about life in general, but clueless about people and how people operate. One wonders how he ever bargained to secure an NBA player for the kind of money that you have to pay NBA players. But that's what he wants us to buy. That he's pretty clueless. But I want to read this one section here that really, I think, says it all about where this person hurts. Because he tears up at one point. I don't know how many of you who saw the interview will remember that, but he tears up at one point, and that is when he was talking about his desire to be loved, and that he had feelings for this girl. And even though she says their relationship was platonic, he is not saying that it was just platonic. And he is also going to say that he was deluded into believing that this woman really cared for him. And therefore, he's hurt now that he realizes that she has taken advantage of him. But this is what he says. He says, that he thought he loved her, and that she loved him, and he perhaps was deluding himself. But everybody does stupid things. when they love somebody. And everybody makes stupid mistakes when they are in this state of denial, basically, when they believe that they have something more in a relationship than they really have. And so therefore, everybody, because everybody wants to be loved, and he realizes that he's been betrayed, he's hurt. And this is when he tears up. This is the time when he tears up, when he says that everybody wants to be loved. And it's just so telltale. It's just so telltale, because at that point he wants you to believe that he is just like you, just like any other person who just wants to be loved and was betrayed and is deeply hurt, and to feel sorry for him. There's just so much in here. I also want to say one brief thing about this. If a person were going to do a good job of not casting themselves as a racially minded person and as a person prone to stereotypes, especially if they were going to cast themselves as a person not prone to stereotypes, I don't know how you can pass up the opportunity to have a little fun with this. He talks about Jewish people. Sterling does. And he talks about them as if Jewish people as a class or as a group of people do certain things reliably, do certain things merely because they are Jewish. In other words, he types them. He talks about Jewish people and what they do when they have a company. Here I quote, "The Jewish people, when they have a company, and it's for people who want to borrow money and no interest, they want to give them a fishing pole. We want to help people. If they don't have money, we want to loan it to you. You don't have interest. One day you will pay us back." That's how just Jewish people do. Not like other people. That's how they do. Oh, really? All Jewish people do this? Yes. And this is a person who is not prone to think stereotypically. In another place he says this, I'll quote again. That's one problem I have, and this is a problem when he talks about, this is a problem he says he has with Magic Johnson. That's one problem I have. Jews, I'm quoting now, Jews, when they get successful, they will help their people. And some of the African Americans, maybe I'll get in trouble again, they don't want to help anybody. Now, this is a man who wants you to believe that he's not racist, not prone to stereotyping, okay? But he says, Jews do it this way, African Americans, they do it this way. He'll probably get in trouble again, but that's the truth. Jews do this, African Americans do that. Then he goes on to attack Magic Johnson. What has Magic Johnson really done for Children's Hospital? Which kids are lying in the hallways? What has he done for any hospital? What has he done for any group? I don't know. Maybe he's done a lot. It's almost comical. I know he's successful in business, but I'm not interested in business anymore at all. I'm interested in helping people. Well, if he's not interested in business, and he's only interested in helping people, and he's only interested in making amends, then please go away. But in fact, this whole charade, and it was a charade, is designed to protect an empire. He is not going quietly. And even if, for some reason, he cannot hang on to the empire, his ex-wife, who has half interest and would get whole interest under some legal possibilities, might be the way that he could still hang on to his wealth. So this is where he's going and why he's going there. It is so patently self-evident. These folks cannot help but show themselves if you just look closely beneath the veneer, and if you listen for instead of to the ridiculous things they say, if you listen for the nature of the content of the things that they say, if you listen to the minimizations, to the rationalizations, to the scapegoating, to the playing the victim, to the turning the tables on the accusers, to throwing other people on the defensive, all these tactics that I outline in my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Character Disturbance, and the Judas Syndrome. If you pay attention to those things, you will see them for who they are. It's that simple. It really is that simple. And I just know that there'll always be another. I mean, I know when I turn on the TV for the evening news that just about every week there'll be another great example. This problem is not going away anytime soon. And we need to start insisting on better accountability. You know, a person like Sterling is living proof, and this is a point that I make very clearly in Character Disturbance and in Sheep's Clothing. Success, especially success in this country, is not predicated on character. You do not have to have character. All you have to do is have the ruthless determination to win. And actually, there are some folks who should really take particular note of that, because there are some folks of fairly decent character, but who also have some weak character out there, and who tend to too easily see themselves as victims and don't realize what they could have if they bothered to fight a little bit for it. So there's the other side to that. But this man is living proof that especially here in this wonderful free country that we enjoy, you do not have to have scruples to get just about everything you want in life, except healthy relationships. But for some people, that's not really high at the top of the list. All you really have to do is have the ruthless determination to win. The absolute stubborn determination to never give up, never give in, never back down. And that's what we saw in this interview. And that's how this man got where he is, and why he's likely to not go away quietly. He will have to be forced out, kicking and screaming. And all I have to say is, good riddance. Before we run out of time here today, though, I want to again invite folks who have any comments they want to make about this or any other matters we've talked about tonight to give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. But as time is running a little short in the program here, I wanted to move away from the enemy within that we've been talking about tonight all this time, and the great example that Donald Sterling gave us this week. This is one thing that threatens our freedom. The lack of character, especially the lack of character of people in positions of power. You know, power does not corrupt. I make this point in both my books. Power does not corrupt. But rather, people of unscrupulous character, they're notorious, ravenous power seekers. They pursue power very viciously, and when they secure power, they inevitably abuse it. And this is exactly what we've seen. So this is the enemy that we have from within, this character crisis. But there is an enemy that we face from without. And the example I want to bring to mind, we don't have that much time to discuss it tonight, but I want to bring this example to mind, is the example that occurred in Sudan of this woman who committed 2 capital crimes. First, she married a Christian man. That was her crime. And because she married a Christian man, every time she has sexual relations with this man, because the man is non-Muslim and her father was a Muslim, her act is regarded as an act of fornication instead of lovemaking between a husband and a spouse. And therefore, she's entitled to 100 lashes. But then she made another fatal mistake, and that was that she agreed not only to raise her children Christian, but to become Christian herself. And apostasy is a hangable capital offense. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I bring this up because the truth is the truth. We have many people promoting the idea that every ideology is equal and valid, and that most ideologies are peaceful except for a few radical extremists. But in many, not a few, many countries where Sharia law is in place and so-called peaceful Muslims exist, these capital crimes also are on the books. This is a peaceful, non-brutal, civilized ideology. The facts speak for themselves. There is a movement afoot. It's analogous to the movement that was afoot in World War II. It is an ideology that is spreading and growing, and it is the threat to our freedom from without. Make no mistake. Folks harboring this ideology despise the ideology that fosters freedom. They despise it. And this ideology is taking root and gaining strength in place after place. I am not advocating violence, but I am advocating that we wake up and that we face the truth and that we call it.